All here with us tonight. We are so appreciative of Dr. Velda Love to be with us on such short notice. She literally got notice yesterday afternoon at around 3 that she was going to have to fly to Omaha, be here overnight, and give a full presentation. That's not a problem with anyone, right? Last minute. So it's terrific that you were able to come here and be with us. We truly appreciate it. Dr. Love is with us before moving to Cleveland to be a part of the National United Church of Christ denomination. She lived in Chicago, and she did her Doctor of Ministry work at Chicago Theological Seminary, which all of you that are in the United Church of Christ denomination probably recognize that as our seminary. Our own Will Howell just graduated from there as well with his MDiv. So it's a fabulous seminary. I myself went to seminary at the Lutheran School there across the street, and wonderful, wonderful place to be. And then from there, she went to another seminary in Chicago just north where Will also went. So you have lots of things in common with Will. She taught at North Park Seminary there for almost 9 years, right? So she's a Chicago native through and through, born and raised there, right? And now is in Cleveland, completely dislocated from her hometown, but she's managing and doing well there. And what she does while she's in Cleveland is create training manuals and curriculums for all of us in the denomination to learn and be sensitized to that whole understanding of racism and justice in the world that has to do with all different levels of justice, like economic justice and gender justice and all those kinds of things. And it's a way to raise all of our awareness and engage us in a way that will help eradicate all the myths that are out there about racism and how we can be a part of speaking to that and addressing it very honestly and truthfully. So we are thrilled that she is here with us tonight to speak to us about that issue. We also have Victoria Parker, Reverend Victoria Parker, who is a local pastor here in Omaha at the AME Church in North Omaha at Franklin and 24th. Yes. And she has been a wonderful gift to this community in helping us engage in ongoing conversations on racism and justice. And so she has agreed to be with us during the question and answer period after Dr. Love's presentation so that we have a local context of all these issues and how we might be engaged in that. So we thank you both for being with us tonight, and let's welcome Dr. Love with a great round of applause.
It's always good to get a text from my executive minister. It is distressing to know that when she texted me yesterday that she was in the hospital and thought that she had suffered a stroke of some kind, but it was actually a pulled muscle that restricted her movement, and her doctor put her on bed rest. And so I'm thankful and grateful for the ways in which she reaches out and to be able to say yes to Reverend Tracy Blackman, that I could get on a plane. She has a fabulous assistant in Denise Pittman who got on the website, got the ticket, because I was thinking, well, if I can't get a ticket, I can't go. But they did find a ticket. It is always amazing to be hooked up to the God that we serve because there's always a purpose for the ways in which God moves in our life. And so I don't want to begin this evening without giving honor to the one we call God, Creator, the one who is Sustainer, Savior, and the one who is Spirit, male and female. Let us pray. Gracious Creator God, we are thankful for the ways in which you have made us. First in your image, second in equity and equality, and then empowered to do the work. It is through you, O God, that we come this evening so that we can hear and listen, suspend, and then pick up. We have work to do. These are urgent times, oh God, and we call on your sacred spirit to give us ears to hear and hearts to listen. Make space in us so that we can be more open to your leading and less talking, more listening and less answers, more questions and less imposing. So be with us, oh God, and create in us new hearts so that we feel renewed to go out and do the work of dismantling racism. But most of all, create in us a space where we believe that you want us to enact justice for all, not for some, but for all. We lift this prayer to you because we believe that Jesus is our Savior. And in that name, I pray. Amen? Amen. Thank you. Thank you. I did spend 16 years in higher education, and so I am just addicted to every book that's printed about something, and so I always take a few with me. This is a little taste. Usually I have a big case of books, and I put them all out, and that's not to make you feel bad if you don't want to read. It's just a way to say that there's a lot that can be hidden in a book. And my former pastor, Jeremiah A. Wright Jr., said, if you want to hide something from somebody, put it in a book. And one of the ways in which we move through our lives and not become more aware, we're waiting for someone to tell us what to do about the systemic issues in our country. We're waiting for someone to tell us how to go about doing the work. I come from a context where that is not the reality. We are not waiting for anyone to come and liberate us. We are not waiting for another MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. We are not waiting. This time that we are living in is urgent. Urgent. It is almost as if the emergency light goes off every morning when I turn on my phone. Something has happened in this country and around the world that says we need to be paying attention and not just reading Fox News or listening to it. We need to be looking at international news. What are people saying about who we say we pretend we are? Because we have not yet lived into being a United States of America. So on behalf of Tracy Blackman, I'm so sorry that she's not able to be with you. I am not her, as you can see. But I want to just thank you for welcoming me. On behalf of Reverend Dr. John Dorhauer, who is our president and executive president and general minister, that's what he is, of the United Church of Christ, sends his greetings, as well as Jim Moose, who is our global executive minister, as well as wider church. And so I'm glad to be with you. Please come on the journey with me. Race is not real. Race does not exist biologically nor anthropologically. Neither is there any reference to race in the 66 canonized books of the Bible. Race is neither scientific nor sacred. Race is an artificial social construct, and it serves a social function. Racism is real. Racism originates from the unholy belief that there are human groups with particular social and physical characteristics that make them superior or inferior to another human group. And that quote comes from Reverend Tracy Blackman, Executive Minister of Justice and Local Church Ministries of the United Church of Christ. I've spent the better part of my professional life asking more questions than looking for easy answers. I self-describe myself because I don't want anyone else's label to be on me. I am a woman of African descent. My ancestors date back over 200,000 years. They are the first Homo sapiens to walk the earth. They come out of the cradle of civilization in lower southern Africa. We are all descendants of the African. Mitochondrial Eve had many daughters, and her DNA lives. My DNA survived the Middle Passage. My ancestors made it over the Atlantic. They survived being enslaved. I never call my ancestors slaves because they were not born slaves. They were enslaved. And therefore, their enslavement is a legacy that we live with. It is not just my history, it is our history. And the ways in which we began to uncover that history is to go back even further than the arrival of the first Africans. It is also a time for us to pay homage to those whose land was stolen, whose children were separated from them and put into boarding schools. We must honor the Native American. It is their land. It is their land. We live on it on borrowed time. If we are not in conversation with those who know how to care best for the land, we are going to lose it. Because we are greedy, we are selfish, we pollute, we poison, we overbuild, we strip, and we kill the environment. We should be in conversation with those who took care of it for over 10,000 years. Amen? And so ways in which we begin to have this conversation around social justice and faith and race is to look at who we are in concert, in relationship with whose we are. We are people of faith, are we not? Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I come from the Black church, and so I encourage you to talk back. Is that okay? Please feel free. I was in Denver last weekend, and I love praise and worship, and so before I began a workshop, I prayed a little Richard Smallwood, the anthem, and had people get up and had them move, and I swear they like little boards. They couldn't get the feet right. I did not ask for rhythm. I asked for movement. And so ways in which the Black body worships God is through its movement, and ways in which we have been told, imposed upon, to be like Europeans was to sit still. And so that particular truth means that we have to reclaim our bodies and move. And that's just not literally, that's both metaphorically and it is truth. It is time to move. We've been sitting far too long. And so I come to you and I may ask you to even get up and move. Is that okay? All right. And so part of the work that I do for the United Church of Christ is around developing material that is to liberate the church. It is different than most material. Some of you have gone through white privilege, am I right? You may be even familiar with Sacred Conversations on Race, right? I created a curriculum called Sacred Conversations to End Racism. We're tired of talking. It's time to get busy. Because we can talk ourselves into comfortability. We can tell ourselves we can check it off. We had this conversation. The world is a mess. It's not my fault. I've done my part. I'm going to go home now. I'm going to open a magazine, maybe not a book, maybe. But this curriculum really is about taking us even further. So my studies have always been around looking at why the African was enslaved, why 1619 was so pivotal for this country, why was Jim Crow such a traumatic part of our history, why did lynching have to take place, why did Black Wall Street get burned down, why were the Chicago riots so pivotal in my city, why were 50 schools closed a few years ago, predominantly Black neighborhoods, why? And then I wondered, was I the only one asking these questions? The why? Has anyone in your household, in your church, asked the why? How did we get here? I begin with an opportunity for us to look beyond just being an American. I would ask my students, tell me who you are, where you came from. They would say, I'm an American. I'm from California. I'm from Massachusetts. My people are from South Carolina. No. Tell me how your DNA got here. It's important to go further back, because if we go further back, we'll understand how we got to where we are in 2018. And so I asked them to dig deeper into their roots. Where are your people from? That's a Southern thing. My people are from Mississippi, Durant, Mississippi, my great-grandparents and their parents, out of the enslaved community. Where are your people from? Are they Irish? Are they Scottish? Are they French? Are they German? Are they Dutch? Are they Portuguese? Are they a conglomeration of all of that? How did you get here? Well, we know how. But how did they get here? What were they fleeing? Were they being persecuted? Was it religious? Was it a famine? Was it tyranny? Why did they come to North America? That's a question you need to ask yourselves. Because if you ask yourself what made them get on a boat, immigrate, migrate, and go back further, we'll have an inkling into how we got into this mess. So part of the conversation, I'm going to just kind of move quickly and tell you a little bit about the curriculum, so that hopefully you'll gather a group together across your churches and someone will get trained as a facilitator, because this is not a self-study. So you just can't download it and go for it. You have to be trained, because it is time for us to begin to listen to the voices of those that have been silent. And so because my work is in pre-colonial Black Africa and African-centered pedagogy, I come out of a Black church. I'm exceedingly, can you tell I like Africa, Black people? And so part of my work is to look at the context of who we are, again, and whose we are. And so it begins with the map of human migration. Sacred Conversations to End Racism begins with mapping human migration out of Africa, which tells the story of our human origins and sacred beginnings. The map of human migration provides in detail when humans first ventured out of Africa some 60,000 years ago, and they left genetic footprints still visible today. And by mapping the appearance and frequency of genetic markers in modern peoples, we create a picture of when and where ancient humans moved around the world. These great migrations eventually led the descendants of a small group of Africans to occupy even the farthest reaches of the earth. The human beginnings. And not just there, I take it even further back. I go back to billions of years. I like it when the earth was just sort of this liquid mess. And then another million or so years, and then it became a solid. And then all this land mass was sort of attached to one another. And then it started to separate. But before it started to separate, these Africans walked upright and moved out into the outer regions of the land mass. And they left their DNA because at that moment there was no racism, because there was no thing as a race. And they moved about the continents. And they did not have any limitations upon the mating ritual. So they left their DNA wherever they went. And so if you do a Ancestry.com or AfricanAncestry.com or 23andMe, you might find out you got a little bit of West African in you. You got a little bit of Botswana in you. You got a little bit of Yoruba in you, a little bit of Ghana in you. I might have a little bit of European in me. But that's a whole nother story. And so ways in which we begin to understand the beginnings. And so when we begin to read the Bible, all of you, just by show of hands, how many of you read the Bible? Okay. I won't ask you why you don't. And so ways in which we come to faith. I always say that when one is born, one is not pop out of the womb. The doctor does not clean you off and say, look, Ma, you got a Christian. You got an Episcopalian here. You got a good Methodist and a good Lutheran. Oh, this one might be a Catholic. Right? The doctor says you have a boy or a girl. The identity of your formation comes from two sets of parents. And you have a baby, a human baby. And so our faith formation comes along later. And then part of this work is looking at, instead of in the beginning, it is in a beginning. Because if you study Hebrew, you know there are no articles, definite articles in there. So it's in a beginning. And so it's not just in the beginning, and we do not take it literally, right? Because you all read it, right? It is an interpretation by a particular people group within a particular context in a particular time. And so we move on. That's week one. We do all that migration work. In week two, we look at Africa's Great Civilizations. If you want to look at a good documentary, it is Africa's Great Civilizations by Dr. Henry Louis Gates, Jr. And we move through that series in order to move into, and so that gives us a really good idea about who are my people. It explores that question. We move then into the construction of whiteness, myths of race and human superiority. Because if we do not understand that race has been constructed in order to give power to the Anglo-Saxon and European descendants, then we have missed that particular story in our own history. And so we have to uncover the myths of race. Race is a myth constructed by men. Science, eugenics, history, education, everything in our foundation codifies and supports the structure that the category of humans would be put in a book and taught in universities. And that these humans were categorized by these skull studies. And the myth was that on the high end, the most intelligent was the European because of the slope of his skull and the contours of his face. and then it moved into the Mongolian, and then the Asian, and at the bottom of the scale is the African. Categorizing human beings, later categorized and then sold as legitimate, illegitimate, error, myth. That is not God's intention for humanity to be categorized in such a way. Because God did not create race nor racism. And so what we learn through this curriculum, and what I want you to walk away with today if you're taking notes, I want you to understand very clearly: people of color, indigenous, native, African, Asian, Arab, we are not a minority. How many of you read the Bible? Read it still. God did not create minorities. And so one of the ways in which we move and journey together in order to eradicate racism is to change our language and the way we relate to people. Never ever call a group of people who are not white minorities. It provides for them an understanding that they are less than a European and an Anglo-Saxon. That's what it means. We are not minorities. There is no such thing as a dominant culture. Say that with me, because I don't think you all believe me. There is no such thing as a dominant culture. White skin privilege is something that needs to be dismantled. Say that with me. White skin privilege is something that needs to be dismantled. There are no hierarchy of humans. Amen? When we become Christian, in whichever way we choose to, if we are reading the Bible, we begin to understand the stories from a Western cultural perspective. When I'm reading those stories, I read them out of the lens of a woman of African descent, and I look for those who are oppressed. I read their stories because those are the stories that matter to Jesus. And so our thinking has to change, our language has to change around how we view other human beings, how we view ourselves, what we've internalized about the other, and what we've internalized and believe others have said about us. And that just doesn't go for race, it goes for gender, ableism, LGBTQ community. All of it has to be dismantled. So the work that I do is called deconstruction and decolonizing. I am going to decolonize my own mind so that I can decolonize someone else's, because it has been colonialism that we have been brought up under. And in ways in which we have to strip ourselves of the colonial mentality is both to what? Read a book, watch a documentary, talk to some people, ask some questions, and dig more deeply. And talk to some First Peoples. In Australia, they're known as Second Peoples. The Aboriginal are the First Peoples. And in Canada, it's the settlers and First Nations. We have not designated yet what that should be in the United States, but I'm sure the Native American has some suggestions on that. Further investigation, and then we'll get on to the faith part, is what does it mean to be white? To dispel myths of European and Anglo-Saxonism as a dominant race. To dispel that dominant and to make us all human equally? And how do we look at equity? We look at the architects of race categorization and the evolution that goes into supporting the myths that fuel colonialism and missionary projects to spread white supremacy and Western Christian ideology around the world. Faith formation is important because if one is not interpreting text from their particularity and their context, you miss the whole moment where God is trying to teach you something about God's empowerment in your life. We have a new encounter with the Bible, the Old and the New Testament. Most of the work in the curriculum is African-centered, but I also have a Latinx group. I will have a Native American group. I will have an Asian, Pan-Asian, Pacific Islander group to interpret the curriculum and to interpret the Bible out of their own context because their voices and their stories matter. And they have to do the internalized work to look at how far they've been colonized to believe the European narrative. And so someone from El Salvador has to have a conversation with someone who's Puerto Rican. Different context of colonialism. And so ways in which we do that is to move out of the way. I'm not sitting in on those meetings because I don't speak Spanish. That is not my second, third, or fourth language. And so ways in which communities come together, because the more the communities come together, the more we can sit and learn from them. As a people of faith, asking more questions, learning from them. What is their interpretation? How have they been colonized? What is the liberation strategy? And then how do we work together? That is justice. We've been divided far too long. It is intentional that there is there is intentionality of division. How do we create a system of listening to each other's story so that we can be part of the liberation narrative for such a time as this, in housing, in economics, in mass incarceration, in all of the ways in which these structures keep us separated? That's one of your strategies as people of faith. How are we going to do it together if we are not listening to how people are living and how people are suffering? Amen? Amen? Amen. All right. I'm convinced that those who do not know what it means to be oppressed have lived through racial trauma and do not face the reality of being profiled, harassed, killed while black or brown, and have absolutely no investment in being life-giving, but complicit in activities instituted by the framers of this country and the ongoing evil of our government to eliminate people of color from the country. What I mean by that is if you have not experienced moments in your life where you have been traumatized because of your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your way of living or being, then the investment to dismantle systems are not important to you because you get to go home, lock the door, and feel safe. And so ways in which we have to do this work differently as the church. How to understand those who have been racially traumatized. We just got through the sexual violence of Me Too. And if you listen to the Kavanaugh proceedings, you can see that our country is really telling us, women, we really don't care if you've been violated. We're going to do this our way. And so the question for me and the question for you is, where is the church? Were you there? Were you a witness? Were you speaking? Were you questioning? Were you silent? Were you activist? Were you an advocate? Were you listening to women's stories? Were you able to talk about violence in your home or in your church? It's not an easy conversation, but it's one that needs to be had. So what I want to, I'm not going to keep you all night because we do have some question and answers we want to get to. But part of what I want to do is look at how we do this engaging in advocacy from a faith perspective. What does it mean to be a person of faith? What does it mean to be a person of faith? Now, again, 16 years in higher ed. I'm coming for you. Help us. Coming for you. What does it mean to be a person of faith in this moment?
What I believe and how I want the world to be.
How would you like the world to be?
Loving,
Mm.
understanding.
Pastor, what does it mean to be a person of faith in this moment?
To me, it's to discern God's will for where we need to be and then find that place where we're specifically called to take action.
Where should we be? What's pressing right now in your head, in your
To
heart?
me, reconciliation with our neighbor and reconciliation with the earth would be a good starts. The two big ways we can basically commit civilizational suicide is through increasing violence with our neighbor and through increasing violence with the earth.
And so what does it mean that we address violence in our society?
To me, it means finding communities who are called to work at a wide variety of ways of engaging the other. For instance, here we have the Tri-Faith Initiative is our latest piece of sense of call to address the other and to try to work out possibilities that for peacemaking that haven't been available for centuries,
Okay.
maybe even since the beginning of our faiths themselves.
Okay, thank you. So one of the ways in which we began to do this work of deconstructing and decolonizing is to name the other. Because everyone has an ethnicity and a cultural background, and ways in which we just say other, we've been othered. And the other never means it's part of the larger community. The other is those people. And so our language becomes important when we talk about people who aren't sitting here tonight. What does it mean? What will we have to do as people of faith?
I was just thinking that the other night we had a presentation here and we talked about the fact that we need to start identifying our biases. We like to say we don't have biases, but we all do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be a good place to start.
Okay, internalized work. Thank you, thank you. People of faith, what does it mean to have faith? And where do we begin? Mm-hmm. I do it.
What was your question again?
What does it mean to have faith? And what should we be doing with it?
First of all, I think just to identify who you are and where you are. And secondly, to have faith means that there's a hope that to me is not totally defined, but one that says there's something greater than me, far greater than me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm. I'm picking on my ride. my rides. What does it mean in this moment to have faith?
Oh, I'm struggling. I am struggling because for a long time we lived somewhere where the faith community was way different than our faith community now. And trying to come into dialogue with my friends who believe just the opposite of what I believe. And finding my argument in the word, in the red letters.
So what's an entryway into having difficult conversations around decolonizing and deconstructing as a person of faith?
I guess, what do you mean by entryway?
I don't agree with what you say about liberation for all, justice for all. What's your response?
Well, I guess I was just in a small group discussion. It was basically about how politics and religion divide people. I can't remember the rest of the name of the book, but one of the things that we talked about in our group was just taking the time to understand like that person's perspective, and then just saying, okay, I understand what you're saying, but this is kind of what I'm saying, and just kind of find like a middle ground, I guess, without forcing them to see things from your perspective, which is hard to do sometimes. But
Thank you. So my friend Tracy Wispaway, Hal Wispaway, and Seth Wispaway are assaulted every day, every other day. They were part of the Charlottesville traumatic experience last year on the 12th of August, when the tiki torch carrying supremacists and nationalists, young men, young white men, came to their town. And so Seth would say that he could go into a place and sit down and order a burger and have a conversation with someone. And one young white male or female would come over and get in his face and tell him, you're wrong. You need to get out of this community. White people run this. We always have, and we always will. You and your kind are destroying America. What's your response?
Wow. I'm in shock. Yeah, I don't know.
What's your faith tell you?
I don't know. You're putting me on the spot. I don't.
Can you help him?
Well, I can. I've always kind of stood up for the underdog, and I don't know where that comes from. But I would get engaged and just say, you know, that might be your opinion, but that's not all of our opinion. I think you need to step aside,
Okay.
and would hope that my kids would be there to see that. That's
Okay.
an example.
Thank you. And part of the responsibility of decolonizing and deconstructing is that if you see this happening, this is your wife, what Seth would do if Tracy were in that situation is to de-escalate it and to protect her. My faith calls me to be like Jesus, to be empowered to speak truth to power, to be in spaces that are most uncomfortable. Joy DeGruy tells a story. She is in a supermarket. Her sister looks white. Joy is very brown. The checker at the counter, her sister goes first, says, "How are you today? Good to see you again." Takes her money. Her sister takes her groceries and moves on. Joy comes to the counter. The woman says, I need 2 pieces of ID to go with that check. And so Joy says she's standing there. Her 10-year-old daughter is looking slightly embarrassed. Her sister is standing to the side. And she says, in her head, what do I do to de-escalate the situation? And she's asking the checker, you did not ask my sister for 2 pieces of, no, her sister says, you didn't ask me for 2 pieces of identification. The sister again looks white, right? And the checker says, I know you. And Joy says, no. My sister's the first time she's ever been in this store. By this time, Joy's daughter is visibly upset and crying. But it took her sister to come and intervene on her behalf in order to keep this woman from embarrassing her and profiling her. Because not only had the woman asked for 2 pieces of identification, she pulled out the bad checkbook. What is the responsibility of a person of faith when someone is being profiled?
The person of faith confronts the situation in a neutral, peaceful way. My own belief is that we are connected to everything and everyone, and my responsibility is to everything and everyone.
Thank you. You're a person of faith. You see the police pull me over. What do you do?
Stop too. Make sure you're safe and find out what's going on. And be a calm presence with an open heart. And to realize that you are we. We are one.
Thank you. Howdy. Don't speak of the English. Yes, you do. You're a person of great faith. And you see what's going on in a community that's not being resourced well. The investment, the developers have come in, they've raised housing. You're living okay. But there's something that can be done. What do you do as a person of faith?
Well, I attempt to do things like we're doing tonight, get as much involved as I can in discussions such as this. But I was thinking about this the other day. I belong to 2 groups, and we've been together, musical groups, and we've been together for about 12 or 15 years. And I haven't been to one of our activities since all this discussion, racial discussion, has taken place, because I don't feel quite as comfortable there, and I'm afraid that some of my good friends might say something to me, and the conversation might go the wrong way, because I feel like telling the truth sometimes, because I know that there was some feelings along before this took place. But you mentioned interracial. My son married white, and my grandson married white. And if my grandson walked in now with his children, you wouldn't know what they were. So I see them periodically, and I know they wonder, Grandpa, what's wrong with you? You know, you don't look as much like us as we think you should if you're a grandpa and whatnot. But I worry about those people such as that. How are they going to be accepted as they get older? Because there's more and more friction taking place, and there's more and more intermarriage taking place. so it's gonna be more and more for those people as we progress. So I just wonder what the future is gonna hold for some of those people that are mixed, because they don't know exactly what they are, and society isn't quite ready to accept what they are. So I don't know whether, but I have faith.
You have faith. Thank you for participating. And part of this exercise is really to begin to get us to think about how we become advocates and activists. And some of you are already doing that work. But most of all, it's to think about more deeply about the people that you engage with that you don't see, who's not sitting at the decision-making table. And when people of different cultural, ethnic backgrounds come into the church and they want to join the church, does the church change to accommodate, or you are anticipating that people will assimilate? Will you change your liturgy and your music so that you grow and stretch? Or do you stay the same and stay with the hymnal you've been using for the last 50, 30, 40, 20 years? The new one. What did we do? How do we have conversations around race and theology? How do we see God? I have a PowerPoint that has images of Jesus, and it goes from Salzman, the 1920, 1940 depiction of a very white Jesus that Salzman, over 60 million of those are in people's wallets and homes. They were in my great-grandparents' home. It was Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, white Jesus. And so when I would go down, I would say, John F. Kennedy can stay, Martin Luther King can stay, please take down the white Jesus. Because again, we're people of African descent. And I want to be able to see Jesus depicted as both female and black. And those who come out of Asian context may want to see Jesus depicted as Asian and male or female. And so we have to begin to think about how we orient ourselves very differently, how we think beyond our own selves and our borders, how we become more inclusive, how our political views can be preached from the pulpit because there is politics in the Bible, in ways in which right now we need to be reading Kings and Chronicles and Samuel. We need to be reading those ancient texts to help us understand our contemporary times. Not much has changed about human beings. And we can talk about this. We are people of great faith, and we are looking for solutions. God is really patient with us. I love the text where he goes to rescue Lot, and he's bargaining, Abraham is bargaining with God. You got 5, God? Is there 5 down there? Wait, God, wait. Well, you got 25. Can I get 25? 30? Are there 30 good people in the audience? You know, God is patient and kind, right? There are things to be done. This is our urgent moment in our time. And so we have to have ways in which we have to have strategy. And part of this is both long-term and short-term strategy, stripping the foundations of the structures of oppression and power. How does that happen if we are not sitting, talking together, policies that are holding us hostage in housing and in education and around gender equity? And we have to sit together to have those conversations. What does it mean? We are having this conversation earlier about being around self-care. We can do this work 365 days a year. Black Lives Matter leaders, many of them have either died because they've overworked themselves or they've been killed by the military, militarized police, because they were not careful or being cared for or overworked. Ways in which we do this work together and then have self-care. What does it mean to sit and reflect on the work that needs to be done so that we can build strategy very differently in our churches and in our communities? How do we recognize when someone is missing from the decision-making table? Do we go ahead and have the board meeting, or do we go out and inquire if there are other people that should be sitting around making decisions for us, because we're going to strategize about marching perhaps to City Hall, or going down to talk to our politicians, or getting some cars or some buses so that we can take seniors to the polls so that they can vote? Are we sitting down having those kinds of conversations? Are we doing the internal work to recognize our biases and then work with communities before embarking on journeys to liberate others? Have we been liberated ourselves? The last thing that we, people of color, don't need are white saviors. We are not looking for you, if you are white, to come into the community and tell us what to do because you have all the answers. Suspend what you think you know. Work on self. Ask more questions. Sit with the Bible and listen to the people on the margins. Read womanist theologians who are building community. Talk to an Asian American about their lived experience in America. Talk to children who have been profiled racially and by gender. Speak to someone who's sitting on the street, who was in a home and now is homeless. How are you going to recognize Jesus? Jesus will be in the alley. Not in a mansion, not in a church. Jesus will be in the alley. We idolize the building and we forget about the people. Go to the alley. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. This is a time now for us to talk about what's happening locally as well. One of the things we're talking about is listening to other voices, and that is exactly the theme of this lecture series for Center for Faith Studies this year. So in your bulletins, you'll notice that we have a whole bunch of other events that are coming up throughout the next program year. We're going to be talking about millennials in November, and then directly following that conversation on millennials, we will have a prayer retreat that Reverend Dr. Eric Elness and Dr. Jana Reese will help us through to talk about some spiritual practices that will help us just naturally learn to listen more deeply. And then that will set us up even that much better to listen to the voices that we're going to be hearing throughout the rest of the series. We do have a movie that we're showing on the Japanese internment experience. We do have Dr. Joe Starita, who will be here talking about the Native American experience and the female gender issue in that as well. Eric Elness will be doing another prayer retreat in March that helps us learn ways to go about listening to ourselves, listening to our neighbors, and listening more deeply for God in that conversation. We host our annual Holocaust speaker as well in March, so we don't know who that person is going to be until they assign that to us, but that has always been a wonderful conversation here. And then Dr. Ahmed Safi will be here as we move into our new building on the Tri-Faith Commons. And he is a speaker that works with the Islamic Center at Duke University, and he's going to be here talking to us about mysticism in the Islam tradition on the Tri-Faith campus, which is fabulous. That's the whole point of being there, is to listen to those voices. So we're very excited to have him with us as well. So that is a plug, a shameless plug, of all the other things that are happening, and we hope that you'll talk that up in the community and bring people in to be a part of these conversations. So without any other delay, I'll ask you both to come back up here or maybe just stand at the front. And then any questions that you have, we'd love to, we have some wandering mics. Tracy has one here and Courtney has one here. We need the mics because we have people that are following this conversation with us online and they can't hear you if you don't have the mic, so please talk into the mic. And we'll talk about the local context as well with Victoria Parker.
Question for Dr. Love. In your, over here, in your research, and you said Anglo-Saxons began racism, how much is institutionalized religion to blame when you look at on racism, discrimination, labeling, putting people in a box, from that salvation narrative, missionaries? And when you were doing that research, did you have a crisis of belief in institutionalized religion? Because you spoke a lot about the Bible as being foundational to the curriculum, and then just reading the Bible, but yet there's a King James Version and all these other things that kind of could have a crisis of belief of, okay, why am I looking at that aspect to then redefine a liberation narrative? That's kind of where I'm at, struggling with how much discrimination, institutionalized religion, and it's that ugly history.
So yes, there is complicity of the institutionalized church. And so it was both the Protestant church and the Catholic church talked about how the African was the heathen. The Catholic church said you can enslave them, don't kill them. The Protestant church says they are not human, you can kill them. And so the church came together. The church got very rich by investing in the enslavement of African and the genocide of the native. And so ways in which those complicit parties, or some of them are coming forward now to talk about the Jesuit churches had enslaved and they're finding their bodies buried on the sites. But ways in which I did not have a crisis of faith. I was in the black church in the 1960s. We were talking about liberation then, and as I continued to grow, we talked about liberation always. And again, I came out of an African-centered church, and so ways in which we were reading the Bible, interpreting the Bible, was not the King James Version, because King James Version was written by 70 of his hired men, and so to consolidate his power. And so we used, so some of the Baptist churches used that particular version, but we used, again, Womanist Voices, Black Liberation, James Cone, Renita Weems. And so all of my context, my theology is around the African-centeredness. And so the interpretations now is the People's Bible, which is very helpful as a cultural document, as well as the People's Companion to the Bible, because I'm listening to all of the voices that may have had crisis, but again, we're looking underneath the text, and we're not looking at the colonized text. And so is it Miguel de la Torre, who has Reading the Bible from the Margins, and there's another, I can't think of her name, Tamaz, who has Bible of the Oppressed. And so having the Bible in one hand that has a liberative, having the newspaper in another hand, having magazine, having these resources and tools helps you dig more deeply.
I appreciate what you've said about listening, and I very much agree with that. However, being a woman, and especially going through the recent Kavanaugh hearings, et cetera, I feel like we've talked, we've said, you know, but nobody listened to us. And so how do we listen but get people to listen to us as well? I think that's very frustrating to me.
Part of that question is, are you speaking about a particular issue of listening? I mean, or just listening in general, or just speaking in general?
Just listening in general.
So I think as a white female, you'll be heard in a different way than a black female or Asian female. And so I get together with my sisters and we talk and we hear one another. And so I would advise women to be together in a group so that they can hear one another, because our experiences are different. They're different regionally, they're different by continent, and they're different by just North America, South America, Central America. We can be African-centered, but our experiences are different. We need to strategize on how we have been colonized. We need to talk about our experience in this country, and for those who are perhaps Afro-British or Afro-Canadian or Afro-Caribbean, and sit down and talk together, and we strategize how we'll be heard. And so I work with millennials right now who are telling their stories, and they are being heard because they've sat with their elders and they've sat with each other, and they've decided that they will not be silenced. And so the Kavanaugh issue is very special because, again, you got white men in power who had an agenda, and regardless of what you said, they were going to move forward on their agenda. And so I would say put more white women in power if you want to be heard. They got 19 African American women, and some Hispanic women, and some Asian women are running right now for Congress. And so I think if you want to be heard, you have to strategize with your sisters about how you need to be heard. Because if there's an agenda from your own kind to silence you, you all need to address that. And that's why the internal work needs to happen there before you start moving out into other people's communities.
I had a question about, not a question, but, a question and a statement. When you were doing the exercise on great people of faith, how would you behave in that situation? And I do believe God has given us all a bag of courage, but how do you extract from that courage when it's covered by fear? I know God did not give us a spirit of fear and everything else, but our society judges us on our behavior, our actions. We belong to a group by how we behave, what we say. People judge us on that. So what advice can you give us so that we can reach, you know what I mean, start pulling that fear away, pull that bag of courage. So if we're in a situation where something happens, we don't think about it, but we immediately respond. What you just did to her was not fair. Because a lot of times you can de-escalate it by bringing it up, but a lot of times we'll walk away. Even today, when there was a young girl who was in a car accident, I walked up and said, "Are you okay? Is your parent coming?" But as I walked away, I thought, I should have stayed. I should have stayed and prayed with her. I should have just waited until her parents came. But there were other policemen there, and there were other cars around, and I was walking with my friends, and it's gonna bother me for 3 days, so I should have just done it. But how do we immediately reach into that badge of courage?
So again, it's part of it is recognizing in the moment what needs to happen. I mean, you might be in a situation where your presence, if there's police presence, you have to determine, is it prudent for you to interject? Do you wait on the sidelines until things kind of calm down? And so it is talking with other folks, talking in your head, talking it through, and then maybe just standing back waiting. Because I've been in those situations where I wanted to just jump in, but then I watched what was happening around me, and other people were taking care of things, so I didn't have to intervene. And sometimes I recognize today is not the day for me to get arrested. And so I have an attorney, and if something is happening, I call my attorney, and I say I'm being followed, or something is going on. But I try to equip myself because I've been followed and I've been stopped, and I want to make sure it's on record. I'm not depressed, and I'm not going to kill myself. And so I have to leave the house knowing I may not come back, but I also have to be equipped in case something happens.
My question has to do with perhaps the format. We strip the Holocaust. We look at it in great detail, but we don't strip slavery. And yet, being a black person, we bring slavery with us, and yet that discussion does not happen within the institutions.
No. There's not been an apology from the United States for enslaving us. We have conversations, that we just don't have a big conversation. But it's easier to forget the sin than to address it. And so why just, we're going to be silent about it. And so we have been carrying around 500 years of trauma in our bodies, and we pass it on through our DNA, and we pass it on to our children. And growing up, my great-grandparents didn't want to talk about slavery, wouldn't talk about it because it was traumatizing. And so it is Truth and Reconciliation, those kinds of forums that allow us to have those conversations. And I think as Black people, we can sit together and have that conversation if we can get our elders to tell us about their experiences. And if we can record some of that and write that down, then we have something to share with the millennial. And so that we don't want it to be silent. We want to be able to talk about it. The Japanese talk about it, right? Other groups have talked about it and have had reparations. But again, we're the only ones. Black bodies don't matter. The system was not set up for us to be able. Yes. We know. And we need to talk. But I mean, there's a lot of information and material out there on it. I just think that we have to begin to also talk about, but what we don't want to do is set it up where our enslavement was worse than. We want to talk about all of the trauma that has been caused by white supremacy. And that's why we deconstruct and decolonize, because we have to name it. And claim it.
I just had a comment to add to that. I think, too, that we've become embarrassed about our slavery. For some reason, we don't want to claim it. And when you get in discussions with other people, they tend to brush it under the rug as if it was our fault. Like we get a Kanye West that stands up and says that Black people chose to be in slavery. And then you have this whole situation but then we still don't talk about it. It's spoken about for a few days and then it's gone, but we still don't sit around the table. Our tradition is Sunday dinner, and we talk, but we don't do that. We don't do that as a community.
So there needs to be collective healing, and there needs to be more conversation, again, across all of that experience. Yes, and the healing is ongoing, and it's not just for Black people. Right. White people need to heal too, because the perpetration of it, not wanting to hear it is also traumatizing, turning away from it. Yes.
I kind of wanted to bring it locally. I'm an Omaha native. I've lived here my whole life, and it's a very segregated city. And something that Pastor Love's, Reverend Dr. Love said that struck me is that she talked about white people coming into the Black community and telling them what to do. And we have resources available here in this city. I think also we have one of the highest poverty rates for children under 2 in the whole United States. And that's something that's always bothered me, and I don't know if Pastor Vicki can speak to this, it's not something that we can go in and tell you what to do, but yet I think there's a desire for people to help. I don't know.
So that's the question. Not so much coming in without, you don't ask us, so we don't trust you. But if you come in saying, what can I do? And come in and sit at the table and listen to what we need. Don't assume you know, but ask the question, and then you'll be told. And it's not that you would come in and say, but it also is to help empower people and, elect those who can make the changes and change the poverty and fix things that are broken. And so it's not about rushing in to try to help, but it's about changing the situations that can prevent the poverty that goes on. I mean, we just had the situation. We know this is a community that has a lot of refugees that have made Omaha their home, but they still live in poverty. They still live in dilapidated housing, as well as other communities, and you can change that.
And it's a journey. You have the option to go back to your community and live very safely. And what I think is needed is people that are going to journey until it is solved, it is changed. And so part of what the class I taught, Sankofa, it means to go back and get it and journey with people. So you become a solidarity partner. You're not just an ally, because allies can make the decision to leave. If you're a solidarity partner, it means that you are learning from people in that community and you're asking, what can I do to walk alongside you? How do we strategize together? I'm not going to leave you. Because once you have a community that's strong and resourced and you go back to your home, what happens to the children who are still there? And so again, it's not just coming in to solve because you got something to offer, but it's about listening and learning from, because you don't know the language, you don't know what traumas happened, you don't know, you don't know. All you see is the surface, but you don't know what these people have lived through and how resilient and strong they are. Or the culture, very different from yours. The language is different. Their ways of being are different. And if you come in and impose what you think people should be doing, again, you will be rejected.
Oh, it's me.
Oh.
I was going back to what you were talking about with history, and I wanted just to say that slavery is in living memory. When I was a child, I remember this person passed away. This person who had been born as a slave, had been born enslaved, and that, or lynching is in living memory. Our grandparents witnessed it. So it's our history. It's not Black history, it's not white history, it's our history. We all own it and we all need to face into it. And I also just want to add to what you were just saying, this is a systemic problem. It's not a North Omaha problem, it's our problem, and it needs to be fixed systemically.
This is a question particularly for Reverend Parker. We've lived in Omaha 6 years, so we don't have deep roots here. Although my husband lived here through high school, but most of our adult lives we lived somewhere else. So here we are now, back for 6 years, and it is not apparent to me what sorts of seeds are there already growing in Omaha that we should fertilize, that we should water, that we should walk toward and help? Or is there not much?
I've only been here 6 years as well. And so I'm going to call attention to somebody else in the room that has been here a lot, that is a really advocate for a lot of programs and a lot of things in the city, and that's Reverend Portia Cabot, and she is pastor of Clare Memorial United Methodist Church. And so she can speak to a lot of things in that, because there are some things that I'm still not familiar with in my own community, as well as just because I'm still like all the segregation that I've seen in this city. And I know she can speak to a lot more that could answer a lot more of your questions.
I guess the first thing that would come to mind is who planted the seeds and how are they being watered. So for instance, in North Omaha, who's buying up all the land? Why were the taxes on houses lowered east of 42nd Street, about 2-3 years ago? And then all of a sudden, those taxes went back up. But somebody bought land while it was low. So even though you say that there may be some seeds, but who planted those seeds? Who's watering those seeds? And who is reaping the produce of those seeds? So those are the things that we have to look at in this city, and especially in North Omaha. But then also, where are we moving people to when we close public housing? We're moving them further out, now past 72nd, past 84th, out to 100 and something, but it's the bus system going out that way. But we're moving them out so that we can come back into the city and be closer to the river. Because this prime land down past 30th, but who's planting the seeds is... They are taking place in different ways, and if you look and realize every time there is a meeting or something going on, who's on those committees? Are they the same people that they are stretching thin? Are they being inclusive? Because this is just not, Omaha is just not a white and black city. You have South Omaha and you have the Hispanics, but you have the Sudanese, you have the Korean. Everyone ought to be at the table, and we don't have that at this point. It is still predominantly white, and they have their implicit bias. And so as long as we got one, we're inclusive. Is that inclusivity? No.
Sorry, this has been a very difficult discussion. And I know that personally, I've really struggled very hard during the last 2 years, particularly more recently, with what would Jesus have been doing? You talk about what do people of faith do? And then, while I'm thinking about that, and what would Jesus' role be? Yes, he would be in an alley, or would he? Would he be leading a charge? Would he be really calling people out when our president, and I'm laying it out there, is racist and spouts hate? And it worries me because then I think about what happened during World War II, when so many people and the churches of America knew exactly what was happening to the Jews and did nothing. And it's just a very painful time in our country, and there is no clear direction about what our behavior should be. Does that make any sense at all?
It makes sense.
It's really a struggle.
But it's always been a struggle for people of color. So it just got painful for some white people in the last 2 years. Just got painful. And they just started to wake up to, oh no, it could be me too. And so, again, I talk about history in terms of when we landed, when we got here forcibly, up until this moment. And so he's not the first racist president. They've pretty much all been racist in some form or another. They've created policy. They've looked back at history and softened the words so that white people could feel comfortable around law and order. And that meant that locking up black people, black and brown people, But when it starts to look dangerously close to home, that I will no longer be comfortable, that my income may be decreased, my property may be taken or something, then it's a crisis. And so my contention is that if it was a crisis 400 years ago, it was a crisis 300 years ago, and had people been paying attention, we wouldn't be here today. And so I can't tell you what to do. Again, you all need to sit down and strategize and figure out and get some people to run for office, because he's not going away because you don't like him. And he is not leading the country. It is the people with the excessive wealth that are business people that are making decisions for him. He is the mouthpiece. And if you don't, again, if you don't get underneath what you see, you're going to miss it.
Ooh, I get the last one. So we have, you're talking about the ally versus the solidarity. And so as a congregation, we've actually moved into solidarity with a fairly large population of people of color in Omaha. But I don't think even half the congregation even realizes that we've done it, because it's through the Tri-Faith Initiative. And so, but the population that we are now joined at the hip on, saying we can't go anywhere, we're leaving our home and going there to you. They are primarily immigrants, and also people of obviously a different faith than ours. And so do you have any advice, either one of you, in terms of how we can be the best tri-faith partner in terms of having a predominantly white congregation relating to a congregation that's really multinational, of a different faith, who are primarily non-white?
Well, the first thing I've learned was Jesus sat where the people sat. Jesus always went and had supper with the people. They didn't come to him, he went to them. So if you want to be like Jesus, then you sit where the people sit. Share a meal with them. Their meal, how they prepare it, not how you think it should be or what you think, but sit with them, have dinner, and have a conversation. We always have good conversation over food, you know, and the Bible always talks about sitting and having food and eating, and that's where most people gather and they have food, and usually you're rested and just, you know, you eat and you talk and you just share with each other and you share something that you're not used to having, and so that way at least you can be immersed in that manner. Think about when kids go and they learn a foreign language, to say the best way to go and learn is to be immersed in the community, and you will learn the language and you'll learn the community. So that's the best way to do it, is to just sit where the people sit.
And the immersion is important in ways in which, what have you learned about the people that you're in partnership with before you went? How much time have you spent learning about their culture? I think that was the mistake when our troops went to Afghanistan. They went in and they bulldozed. They had no idea that these people had a religion and had a faith and had a history. And so instead of ways in which you partner ecumenically or across faith lines, is to look at the equity of the faith, to look at the equity of the immigrant. Who are they? What do they call themselves? And so again, it's sort of sitting with people, learning about people, and then having conversation, asking them, what do you want? How can we walk alongside you?
Just one more. I think your summary really is giving us the answer to my question. But how, when you have someone that you work with, that you're with, who does not have any acknowledgement or wishes to acknowledge white privilege, or even begin to learn about it, how do you start that uncomfortable conversation and that listening that has to happen?
Everybody is not going to get on the bus. And I am like Jesus. I dust my feet and I keep going in some situations, And then there's some people that are better at getting to the crux of it. I think someone who is, if this person, I don't know, you didn't name gender or ethnicity, but they may need to sit with that same like person, not like-minded, but someone who looks like them, and it's just over time. And so it would not be me, because I don't have that kind of demeanor today.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing. In seminary, Dr. Dorhauer, he was my professor, and I took the white privilege class. And one exercise that he would have us do was to just go somewhere and just sit and watch. And maybe your friend or whatever can just sit and watch and see an interaction or how they, either fits in the situation or what they see. Because it was just entitled "What I See," and you would either see something based on race or not, or how that person may fit. Let them go sit in a restaurant where there are people of other races and see how they feel and see how they, something like that. But we had to do that exercise and write about it. And it helped some people in the class and some didn't.
Right.
But,
Everybody's not going to be on the journey.
Right.
Round of applause. Yeah.
Reverend here triggered a couple of my thoughts. I came out here with some friends of mine, and I was telling them about the meeting I'm going to. In today's paper, the city council is going to be meeting on Tuesday for a couple of weeks, and I put it on my calendar. And they're going to discuss the area north of Cummings Street. I was born in Omaha. And the area north of Cummings is now called Nodo, and it's very desirable land and buildings. And Sokol, Peter Kiewit, and people that we can't even touch are getting involved in that area, and they're going to redo those old warehouses. Now, years ago, the area north of Ames was called the near north side. If you were black and lived north of Ames, you lived on the near north side. And you didn't live in North Omaha, stopped at Ames Avenue. And that was North Omaha. So our area was north of Cummings and south of Ames. And now all that property, as she says, has gotten very valuable. So the city council is meeting a couple of Tuesdays, and I plan on going to that meeting, and they're going to discuss what they're doing at those old warehouses. Now, down the old market area, south of Leavenworth Street, is now called Soto, South Omaha, downtown. And all those, pardon?
I was going to say, I noticed that on the news, it was north downtown.
Yeah, north downtown is the old, what you think of downtown. From Leavenworth in the old market area, south of Leavenworth, it's called Soto, South downtown. The area north of Cummings was called the near north side at one time. And now it's called Nodo, where the warehouses are. And years ago, Weed, the Wesley High. Yeah, well, he advocated for a buffer zone on about Paul Street. And no warehouse areas could be built north of Paul Street. And just a green space. And now I don't know where they still recognize that green space anymore. But I would urge anybody that's interested to go down to the city council and just listen to the discussion group. Now, I don't know about any of you all that are here, but I know I can't compete with Kiewit or Sokol or the one that bought all the land at Boys Town. I was just out there the other day for volunteer work I do out that way. And they're doing all that grading out there. Every street is a detour, you know. And the meeting was at 192nd, and it was across from the Methodist Women's Hospital. Now, I was born in Omaha, and I had never been out that far before. It's like New York. It's all built up, you know, and so I think it'd just be interesting if you could attend that city council meeting, and it's going to be on Tuesday.
Get rowdy.
Okay, so we can check the World Herald for more information on that. Another event that we can be a part of is being sponsored by First United Methodist. Cynthia Lindemeyer is a pastor there. And we have on the back of our lecture themes here is an ad for being a part of race relations dinner and discussions. It's an ongoing conversation that we try to have ecumenically throughout the Christian community, as well as now with the interfaith community and the tri-faith, about how we engage ourselves as people of faith in the community conversation, because these are the people that we're called to serve, right? So these are ways to get engaged, and there's lots of different things on community calendars throughout the city of ways that you can be involved in the policy planning. The elections coming up are huge. If you don't know of how you can get involved, be sure and give us a call, and we'll connect you to other people that can give you these kinds of places where you can get involved. The elections are huge. Yeah? Just register. You don't need tickets. Just register, right? If you know someone that's not registered to vote, get them registered. By the 26th, that's a huge thing. Listening to, if one of the exercises that you're suggesting is that we go to a restaurant and just watch the difference of color versus non-color, or whatever. I know there's a better way to say that. I'm sorry about that. But there is also the whole understanding that if we go to those city council meetings and just sit and listen, what is the struggle that's happening there of the voices that are missing against the people who have the voice? So just paying attention to that is one way to give you the empowerment that you need to articulate what it is your faith is calling you to be about in that situation. So that many of us are caught offhand in our faith when we say, what is our faith that's calling us to be a part of engaging in our community? We sit there and we think, we know this is wrong, but we have no idea how to talk about that. The only way to get better at that is to talk with one another and learn some of the language that you can do that. Practice what it takes to be out in public, talking to people about how you can disrupt bad situations. Take the training that you need to get better at that. There's all kinds of ways to just start with the very next step. And I would encourage all of you to be a part of that. And our churches will promise to provide opportunities for you to get better at that. Okay? Coming to these kinds of lectures is one of the main ways to do that. So thank you all for coming. We're going to let Reverend Dr. Love out first so that she can greet you out there, as well as Victoria Parker. Thanks again so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Is that? Okay. Should I turn you off?